Right at Elizabeth's will, reading, everyone believed her son, Ryan, would inherit the entire fortune. He sat there arrogantly, waiting for the moment he would rise to rule over an empire worth tens of millions of dollars. But then, with just one sentence from the lawyer, my name, David Miller, was read out, along with the declaration that I was to inherit more than $33.5 million, a chain of commercial properties, and 70% controlling shares in Miller Consulting Group. The entire room fell silent. Ryan leapt to his feet, his face drained of color, shouting before everyone, "Impossible!" "He's nothing, just a failure, a disgraceful shadow in my mother's life." In that instant, I, the man who had sacrificed my youth for this family, was publicly humiliated by my own son in front of the crowd. And that was only the beginning. Before I continue, allow me to thank you, the one listening. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're listening from in the comments. Your support is my greatest motivation to reveal the full truth behind this shock. Let me continue my story. After the solemn funeral at the church, lawyer Dan Morrison invited a few close confidants and immediate family members to his downtown office for the will reading. The room was wide, elegant, and decorated with diplomas and certificates. Sunlight poured through the tall window onto the polished wooden table, where a thick stack of documents awaited. The old clock in the office ticked steadily, each sound stabbing into my chest. I sat silently in a worn leather chair, dwarfed by the lavish room filled with symbols of others' success. The sunlight reflected off the glossy table, showing a man with salt and pepper hair, an old suit, David Miller, out of place in the grandeur. Across from me, Ryan, the flesh and blood son I once cradled, once sang to through sleepless nights, now sat with arms folded, radiating arrogant confidence, as if the entire world were just a backdrop for the moment he ascended to the throne of Elizabeth's empire. His half-smile was like a slap to my face. To him, I was nothing but a burden, a useless shadow, the mediocre father he had scorned countless times. I came here with only one thought, to close a chapter of life. After years of separation, I never believed I would even be mentioned in the will. At most, Elizabeth would leave a perfunctory line, cold and dismissive, as a reminder that I once existed. I told myself I would sit quietly, listen, then leave, an outsider, accustomed to being forgotten. Dan Morrison adjusted his glasses and opened the thick file. The room fell abruptly silent, broken only by the rustle of pages, each sound grinding against my chest. His voice came slow and deliberate, every word like a hammer blow. "This is the final will of Mrs. Elizabeth Miller. And it will change everything you believe." Ryan's smirk widened, his face swelling with pride. Elizabeth's confidants and business partners whispered, every eye locked on him, the presumed heir. No one looked at me, as if my presence was a clerical error in this room. Then my name was spoken, clear, cold, heavy as a knife cutting through the air. "David Miller!" The room shook. The whispers stopped. Ryan's smile froze on his face. I heard the chair slam back as he jumped to his feet. His eyes blazed with fury and disbelief, as though the universe itself had betrayed him by naming a failure like me. In that moment, I felt every gaze turned toward me, hundreds of sharp blades piercing my skin. In a flash, I, the man who had long seen himself as a shadow, was dragged into the eye of the storm. Never before had I felt so exposed, humiliated, and estranged. Memories ripped open, dragging me back to those years of poverty, where it all truly began. Looking at me now, with gray hair and a worn suit, few would believe there was a time we had nothing but empty hands, and love fierce enough to gamble a lifetime. On our wedding day, I couldn't even afford a proper gold ring. What we exchanged was a pair of cheap silver bands from a street shop, so flimsy they scratched within weeks. On our honeymoon night, instead of a luxury hotel, we lay on a rickety iron bed in a shabby rented apartment, the wooden floor creaking under every move. But in the dark, with Elizabeth's hand in mine, I believed I was the richest man alive. Back then, Elizabeth was full of ambition. She didn't just dream of a stable home. She dreamed of escaping poverty, of never again scrambling for rent money. One evening, while we shared a cheap bowl of mac and cheese or canned soup, she looked at me, her eyes glowing. "Honey," she said softly, setting the soup down, her gaze bright in the weak yellow lamp. "I think if I could study business administration, get a degree, real training, I believe I could do so much more. Not just find steady work, but build something of our own, a real company. We could escape this life, not always struggling." I froze. I knew what it meant. School would cost money, and it would take years. Rent, bills, food, everything would fall on me alone. I knew she worried about me. I smiled, brushed her hair gently. "Go study. Let me handle it. Just stay healthy. Everything else, I can bear." She hesitated. "But if I study, you'll carry so much. Your job is already heavy." I squeezed her hand. "I'd rather carry the burden than watch you bury your dream. Go. I'll stand behind you." From the day Elizabeth enrolled, my life stretched to the breaking point. At dawn, I wore my work clothes, reaching the factory before sunrise. The roar of machines and the clash of steel became my daily soundtrack. When my shift ended, while coworkers went home, I rushed to another job, sometimes hauling cargo in cold storage, sometimes fixing pipes, sometimes delivering pizzas until midnight. Every penny was wrapped in careful budgeting. At our small table, I left myself dry bread, cheap peanut butter, and discount soda. Anything better, I saved for Elizabeth. Only if she had her strength could she study and chase the dream for both of us. Some nights, I came home drenched in sweat, my hands bleeding from lifting too many heavy boxes. I quietly rinsed my wounds under cold water, then tiptoed into the room. Elizabeth would be bent over thick textbooks, the desk lamp casting a glow over her weary but determined face. Just seeing her like that made every ache disappear. Once I had such a high fever that my body shook uncontrollably. That night I worked in a freezing warehouse, icy drafts cutting into my back. A coworker told me to rest, but I forced a weak smile. "I'll manage." I couldn't skip work. Missing a shift meant missing tuition. I stumbled home shivering, downed a few cheap pills, then collapsed on the couch. By morning, I dragged myself back to work as if nothing had happened. I didn't allow myself weakness, because every day off was a day Elizabeth's dream slowed down. Many times she wanted to quit, seeing me thinner, eyes dark with exhaustion, steps heavy. But I always smiled, hiding the pain. "Don't worry about me. Keep going. I can take it." And I truly did take it all. Some evenings I came home a little earlier, finding her scribbling lecture notes. I stood quietly at the door, watching her small frame under the golden light, like a fragile flame. And I told myself, as long as I keep this flame alive, every hardship is worth it. Yet tragically, all those sacrifices, the years I bled and sweated to keep her dream alive, would one day be forgotten by the very woman I bore them for. 4 years after Elizabeth officially set foot in the university halls, I watched her in a graduation gown, holding a bachelor's degree in business administration. The radiant sunlight bathed the campus, her face glowing as if she had never endured those long nights buried in books. I stood in the back row, wearing a faded shirt, clapping until my hands stung. In my heart was a simple joy. All the years of sweat and blood I had given were finally repaid with this result. She did not stop there. With her degree and new confidence, Elizabeth began building her career. At first, it was just small projects, consulting for a few local shops, helping them with bookkeeping and cost calculations. There were many failures, many times clients walked away, but her persistence surprised me. I was always there, quietly giving her what little savings I had, reminding her to eat, and encouraging her whenever she felt discouraged. Then one day, luck smiled. A mining company in the region came looking for someone to advise on financial management strategy. Elizabeth was given the opportunity, and she worked day and night, preparing every plan, every report. The contract was signed successfully. For the first time, the money she earned was several times more than my monthly salary. From then on, her small company gradually expanded. The first office, once in an old building, was now replaced by a sleek new office in the center of town. Staff grew from a handful to dozens. At the same time, we moved out of the cramped rented apartment and bought our first house. I remember the day we stepped into that home. Not a luxurious villa, just a modest two-story house with a small lawn in front. But for us, it was a dream. Elizabeth stood in the living room, tears running down her face, whispering, "Honey, at last we have a real home." I held her tightly, my heart brimming with pride. That happiness doubled when, a few years later, Ryan was born. Seeing the tiny boy in his mother's arms, I suddenly felt every sacrifice had been worth it. The sleepless nights, the meager meals, the fevers I had forced myself to endure, all of it was for this moment. For a time, my family had it all: a home, a rising career, and a little son like a priceless gift. Those were the days when I believed we would walk through life hand in hand. But life never stops at peaceful chapters. As Elizabeth's company grew stronger, as the spotlight began to surround her, the seeds of cracks started creeping into this happiness. In the first years after Ryan was born, our small home was filled with laughter. In the evenings, I cradled him in my arms, rocking him with a trembling lullaby. Elizabeth was still gentle then, sitting nearby, her eyes full of happiness as she watched us. But only a few years later, everything began to change. Her company grew at a dizzying pace. From a tiny office with a few desks, it became a headquarters with dozens of employees. Contract after contract rolled in. Clients were wealthy businessmen, faces we once only saw in newspapers. She became busier, her schedule packed, traveling constantly. At first, I told myself this was the rightful reward. I was happy for her, happy for our family. But then I began to feel the distance grow. She often returned home late, exhausted, but her eyes lit up when she talked about a deal she had signed, a meeting she had led. Meanwhile, the little stories I brought home, fixing a leaking faucet, or taking Ryan fishing at the lake, no longer held her interest. I saw impatience in her eyes. One evening, when I suggested we eat dinner together with the stew I'd made, she frowned slightly and said softly but coldly, "Honey, I'm used to dining with partners. They talk about strategy, about investment. Sitting around these everyday stories, sometimes it feels out of place." That sentence was like a small knife, not immediately painful, but leaving a wound that bled slowly. The conflict became clearer when we discussed raising Ryan. I believed a child must learn the value of labor, must be taught responsibility from a young age. Elizabeth thought otherwise. To her, Ryan was the little prince, whatever he wanted. He got the first sign of this difference appeared when he turned 6. I bought him a second-hand bicycle, wanting to teach him balance, how to fall, and get up again. But Elizabeth fiercely opposed. "What are you doing? Kids these days all have brand new bikes, and you give him this old thing?" "He'll be ashamed in front of his friends," I replied firmly. "I want him to learn appreciation, not to think everything comes easily." She snapped back coldly. "You're too old-fashioned." Today's world means giving our child an advantage, never letting him fall behind. From then on, Ryan was showered with expensive things: the latest tablet, designer clothes, and costly sneakers. He grew used to asking and receiving without ever knowing the value of money. I objected, but every time I spoke up, she only looked at me with disdain. "Don't use your poor past as a standard for him. He deserves more." At gatherings with her friends and business partners, I often sat quietly in a corner. Their conversations were always about markets, investments, and profits. Elizabeth spoke of me as a side note. He just has a stable job, enough to help with the family. I heard the guilt in her tone, but also something else. Like she was justifying why she still kept a husband, beneath her level. Gradually, I faced a bitter truth. In our well-furnished new home, I was the outsider. When Ryan turned 10, I decided to teach him responsibility. I gave him simple tasks. Every morning he had to make his bed, fold his blanket, and clean his desk. To me, these weren't just chores, but lessons in independence. But within days, Elizabeth was angry. She stormed into his room, saw Ryan pouting as I reminded him, and immediately scolded me. "Do you have to be so strict?" "He's just a child," I shot back. "If he doesn't learn now, he'll grow up spoiled." "I don't want my son to become someone who doesn't respect others' efforts." She crossed her arms, her eyes flashing. "Don't impose your poor man's mindset on him. He was born to deserve more." That sentence was like a bucket of cold water poured over me. All those years I had broken my back, shed blood and sweat, so Elizabeth could study, so we could have today, were dismissed in a few words. Poor man's mindset. We argued more often. Elizabeth, consumed by her company, cared less about family. When I tried to talk, she brushed me off. "You don't understand. Success requires sacrifice." One evening, after an argument about Ryan's bad grades from playing too many video games, I finally snapped, "You're ruining him. You give him everything except what he needs most. Discipline, limits, respect." Elizabeth laughed, but her laugh was bitter and scornful. "What do you know about success? You're just a worker, with no degree, no career. Without me, you'd still be some nobody, laborer." I froze. Her words stabbed straight into my heart. All my silent sacrifices, the nights I worked through fevers, the pennies I saved, meant nothing to her. I looked at Elizabeth, the woman I once loved with all I had, and saw only the cold eyes of an ambitious businesswoman. I realized that the love I had once carried to the sky no longer existed. I turned to Ryan. He sat there, his eyes gleaming with the same defiance as his mother's. He repeated words that cut me again. "Dad, stop it. You're just jealous because you've never achieved anything." My hand trembled in a tight fist. I knew if I stayed, I would only be a shadow, humiliated in my own home. That night, I packed a few clothes, leaving a short note on the kitchen table. "I'm leaving. Not because I stopped loving, but because in this house, love no longer has a place." Elizabeth didn't stop me. Perhaps to her, my departure was just one less burden. As for me, walking out that door, I carried a shattered heart. From then on, Ryan and I lived in two different worlds. He grew up in luxury, wrapped in his mother's indulgence. I lived alone in a small rented apartment, continuing to work quietly to sustain what was left of my life. And I had no idea that those words, that departure, would become scars. Scars that years later, in today's lawyer's office, would be torn wide open again in front of everyone. Elizabeth passed away from lung cancer after many months of fighting in the hospital. The bad news hit me like a knife twisting straight into my heart. But for this city, it was a major event. People spoke of her as a symbol of success, a courageous businesswoman. And her funeral was held at the largest church, solemn, crowded, no different from an honor ceremony. I arrived in an old suit, my steps slow on the church steps. Around me, gleaming luxury cars lined up. Businessmen and politicians in sharp clothes went in with faces both mournful and calculating. As for me, I quietly held a simple bouquet of white flowers, hoping to place it before the casket as a final farewell. The moment I entered, whispers spread like fire in the wind. "There he is, the ex-husband. I heard he never helped, only dragged her down. Shameless, a freeloader who dares to show his face." I lowered my head and went quickly to the back row, my heart heavy. I told myself, just sit quietly, wait for the final moment, then leave. But a voice rang out, cold, cutting through the solemn air. "What are you doing here? Ryan, my son, in a tailored suit, a luxury watch glittering on his wrist, he strode straight over, his contemptuous gaze as if at an enemy. I stammered, struggling to stay calm. I only wanted to say goodbye to your mother, one last time. He did not speak softly. He deliberately raised his voice so everyone at the funeral could hear clearly. Goodbye? What right do you have to say goodbye? When my mother fought her illness, where were you? When she needed a strong man, you walked away. You don't deserve to be here. Eyes turned toward me, cold and probing. I heard someone murmur, how shameful. To think Elizabeth was ever tied to a man like this. I kept my composure, my voice trembling. Whatever happened, I was once a husband, a father. I have the right to say farewell. Ryan laughed with disdain, the sound echoing through the church. Then he turned to the entire crowd, his voice sharp as if laying charges. This is David Miller, a man who spent his life being a burden. While my mother poured herself into building a career, he stood there, insecure and helpless. Don't let him pretend to be a good husband or a model father. He was never anything except a cowardly failure. The whispers flared violently. My face burned and my back felt pressed into the seat. Every word from his mouth tore open the veil, covering my silent sacrifices. I could have leapt up, could have shouted out every night I broke my back so Elizabeth could study, every callus on my hands, every fever I clenched my teeth through. But this was her funeral. Before the casket, I could not turn my last goodbye into an argument. I simply walked up, placed the white bouquet by the casket, and bowed my head for a long time. Behind me, I heard Ryan hiss, loud enough for the whole hall to hear, "You're just putting on a show." "Drop that grieving face. My mother doesn't need it." The hall fell silent for a few seconds, then buzzed even more harshly. I felt myself broken beneath hundreds of blazing, knife-heavy stares. And in that moment, I understood. Never in my life had I been humiliated like this, in the very funeral of the woman I had once loved with everything. The solemn sound of the church still rang in my ears, but the tap of Dan Morrison's papers pulled me back to reality, the will reading at the law office. Besides me and Ryan, there were a few of Elizabeth's close confidants, her younger sister, a longtime company associate, and 2 or 3 close relatives. They sat in rows, their eyes a mix of curiosity and gravity. I felt out of place on the hard wooden chair, my worn suit in stark contrast to the elegant dresses around me. Ryan sat in the center, shoulders slightly thrown back, a bright gold watch on his wrist, casting light onto his proudly raised face. Clearly he saw this afternoon as merely the ceremony to formalize power that already belonged to him. Dan Morrison placed a thick file on the table and slowly adjusted his glasses. His voice was steady, each word heavy as a hammer. "This is the final will of Mrs. Elizabeth Miller, legally executed last March. She was fully lucid, acting voluntarily. With witnesses, everyone held their breath." Ryan's lip curled, a confident smile, ready to receive a fortune of millions. Dan opened the first page. "First, I leave to my son, Ryan Miller, the current family residence. This house is to keep all furnishings, but may not be sold for 10 years. In addition, Ryan will receive the sum of 300,000 United States dollars to be dispersed from an investment account." For a moment, the room was dead silent. I saw Ryan jolt, his smile freezing. He sprang up, his voice cracking. "What? Only that?" Eyes began to waver. A relative of Elizabeth whispered, "It must be just the opening." Another frowned, puzzled. Dan turned to the next page, his tone still even. "The remainder of my estate, including more than $32 million in investment funds, commercial real estate, and 70% of the shares in Miller Consulting Group, I give to my former husband, Mr. David Miller." The room convulsed. I heard sharp intakes of breath. A few chairs scraped back in shock. A relative blurted out, "Impossible. Why give him everything?" A longtime associate muttered, "This completely contradicts what we thought." Ryan screamed, his face flushed. No, this is a joke. He doesn't deserve it. He never did anything. He's just a failure. Why would my mother betray me like this? He snapped toward me, eyes blazing, his voice ripping the air. What did you do? You tricked my mother, didn't you? I sat frozen, my heart pounding. I never imagined Elizabeth would leave me the vast enterprise she had bled to build. In the astonished eyes around me, I saw one truth. None of them understood why. Dan Morrison closed the file and tapped the table lightly. These are Mrs. Elizabeth's words, with no coercion. She prepared carefully, and this decision has full legal force. The room remained chaotic. Ryan enraged, relatives whispering, associates stunned. I sat motionless, as if lifted off the ground. I did not know what to believe, except the truth, that only Elizabeth held the key to explain everything. The air in the law office seemed ready to explode. Ryan shot to his feet, his chair clattering onto the wood floor. His face burned, veins standing out on his brow. No! This is outright fraud, he shouted, jabbing a finger at my face. He deserves nothing. He is the coward who left when my mother needed him most. And a man like that inherits everything? This is an insult to my mother and to this family. His shout slammed through the room, stunning those seated nearby. A relative whispered, "This really is strange," while one of Elizabeth's associates shook his head in confusion. They did not understand, but before Ryan's furious storm, no one dared intervene. He kept shouting, "I was with my mother for years. I built the company with her. I am the rightful heir." And he vanished from her life. What right does he have to sit here and claim tens of millions of dollars? Ryan's eyes bored into me, blazing with hatred. I felt each word like a knife driven deep into my heart. Perhaps, if not for the people present, he would have lunged to strangle me on the spot. I shook my head slightly, my voice choking. I don't know. I truly don't know why your mother decided this. But Ryan would not let me finish. He laughed, the sound bitter and venomous. You don't know? Don't play dumb. You must have deceived her. When she was sick, you found a way to get close, to plant false ideas in her head. You exploited her weakness to take everything. The room erupted. Some relatives began murmuring, suspicious. Their eyes slid toward me, half believing, half doubting. My heart ached because I understood. In this moment, no one but me believed that I was innocent. I opened my mouth to respond, but Dan Morrison raised his hand, his voice sharp and cold, cutting through the chaos. That's enough, Ryan. What you just said is baseless and insulting. I must remind you, this will was executed when Mrs. Elizabeth was completely lucid, with full medical evaluations and witness signatures. There was no deception or coercion involved. Ryan glared at the lawyer. I don't believe it. I'll sue. I'll take this to court. I'll prove he's unworthy and take everything back. His voice echoed, shrill with hatred. Those around, though stunned, began to divide, some nodding in agreement with Ryan's fury, others tilting their heads in doubt, trying to stay composed. Dan waited until the room settled slightly, then spoke slowly, his gaze sweeping across each person. Mrs. Elizabeth anticipated disputes. She left behind something important, a handwritten letter, signed the same day as this will. In it she explained clearly why she made this decision, and I am authorized to read it only when all principal heirs are present. The room fell into heavy silence. All eyes were fixed on the file Dan held. Ryan clenched his fists, his eyes flashing with rage and desperate curiosity. He growled, "A letter? That must be another play you staged. I won't believe a single word of it." I sat there trembling. Deep inside, I prayed the letter might ease some of my injustice, might show everyone that my silent sacrifices weren't for nothing. Yet at the same time, I was terrified. What truth would the letter reveal? Dan gently opened his desk drawer and took out a cream-colored envelope, the handwriting on it all too familiar. Elizabeth Miller. He placed it on the table, his voice firm. This is her final word, and it will answer all the questions causing this dispute. No one spoke further. Only the ticking of the clock could be heard, as though signaling that the door to the past was about to open, revealing the truth everyone awaited. Dan Morrison put on his glasses, slowly tore the seal, and pulled out several pages. Then he began to read, "My dear David, if you are reading these lines, it means I am gone. And I know you are sitting there, bewildered, not understanding why I left everything to you. First, I want to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry that our marriage ended in ruin, not because of you, but because of my blind ambition. I chased titles, wealth, and glitter, and in doing so I lost the most precious thing, a happy family. Only when illness struck, when I lay in that cold hospital room, did I realize no one was truly by my side. The only one there was Ryan, and if only back then I had listened to you, to let you teach him labor, responsibility, then today I might have a grown son who knows love, who knows the value of life. But I spoiled him, turned him into a reflection of pride and blind ambition. That is my fault, not yours. Now I finally understand. All the titles, the wealth, all the money I amassed, none of it could buy back my lost health. None of it could return the simple days of happiness with you. Those hard days when we had nothing but each other and a few dollars, those simple things are now priceless. I once felt ashamed, once thought I had more time to return and apologize. But now it is too late. Ryan, my son, if you are listening, you must be furious. You must feel betrayed. I understand. But son, all these years I spoiled you too much. I thought giving you everything was love. But in truth, I only made you forget the value of work and gratitude. You are intelligent and brave, but arrogance has clouded your heart. I cannot leave you all my wealth, for that would ruin you once again. You must learn anew. You must be corrected. And only your father, the man you once scorned, can do that. $300,000 and the current house are enough as a beginning. If you value it, you will learn your first lesson, to hold on to what you have. David, I leave you the company, the wealth, not as a burden, but to save what I lost, a son. Teach Ryan to become a true man, even if I am no longer there. Once more, I am sorry, David. Thank you for loving me so much, and I want you to know I did realize and cherish those years with you. They were the most beautiful memories of my life. Goodbye to you and to our son. Elizabeth. When Dan folded the letter, the room fell as if drained of air. I sat frozen, my chest pounding. Those words were like blows, painful for their lateness, yet soothing because at last Elizabeth had seen, had understood all the sacrifices I had silently carried. Ryan's eyes burned red, his fists clenched, his lips trembling. I knew each word in that letter was a slap against his pride. But that was the truth he could no longer escape. The confidants in the room sat silently, their faces a mix of shock, pity, and respect. No one dared whisper, no one looked at me with the contempt they had at the funeral. The letter had changed everything. As for me, David Miller, I could only place my hand on my chest, close my eyes softly, and whisper, Elizabeth, I heard you, and I will do as you wish. The air had barely calmed after Dan folded the letter when Ryan suddenly leapt up. His chair crashed onto the floor with a harsh crack. His face was flushed, eyes blazing, as though every word of the letter had slashed his pride to pieces. No, this is fraud. These cannot be my mother's words, he roared, his voice hoarse with rage. My mother would never leave everything to a failure like you. What did you ever do to deserve it? You abandoned her, abandoned me, and now you receive all the wealth, the company, the honor? Absurd. I sat still, my hands clasped tightly, my heart pounding. I had expected my son to react fiercely, but I never thought he would publicly humiliate me like this, before family and confidants who once looked at me with scorn. Ryan turned to Dan, slamming his hand on the table. You were my mother's lawyer, and you dare abet this forgery? Dan Morrison remained calm and said, "This was her final will." "Her final will?" Ryan sneered, his bitter laugh echoing through the room. "Her final will is to hand everything to a worthless man like him? A washed-up old man living on day wages, knowing nothing about business, unfit to steer an empire? His whole life, he was nothing but a faint shadow under my mother's feet." He pointed straight at my face, his voice a hiss. "David Miller, you are not my father. A true father would never abandon me, never leave my mother to bear the burden alone. You are just a leech, now lucky enough to seize everything. But I swear, I will never call you father." The room shook. Some relatives murmured in agreement, others sat silent, their eyes a mixture of disbelief and pity. A longtime friend of Elizabeth rose, his voice cold. "David, do you think you deserve this? We saw Elizabeth build the company from nothing, and you, where were you then?" The wave of opposition spread quickly like fire. One of Ryan's aunts shook her head. "Elizabeth could have flown higher, if not for you." The whispers and judgmental stares surrounded me, turning me into the center of an unspoken trial. Ryan stood in the middle, reveling as though he had found allies, his voice louder, firmer. "See? Everyone knows you're not worthy. This is a joke. I will never accept it. I'll sue. I'll drag this to court. I'll prove he has no right to run the company." I took a deep breath, rose to my feet, my gaze calm yet unyielding. "Ryan, you may despise me. You may think I'm a failure. But here's the truth. Your mother left everything to me, not for the money, but because she wanted you to be taught from the beginning again. You have the right to be angry, but you do not have the right to reject this will. If you want to prove your mother wrong, then prove it by becoming the man she wished for, not through insults." The room fell silent again. Ryan clenched his fists, his lips trembling with fury. He shouted one last line like a declaration of war. "I'll make you regret this. You will never be worthy of sitting in my mother's place, and I will take everything back." He stormed out, the door slamming loudly behind him, leaving behind a heavy silence. I stood there, watching the doubtful eyes around me, but in my heart, a decision had already formed. I would not retreat. Elizabeth had entrusted me with this responsibility, and I would see it through, even if it meant facing my own son. In the days after the will was read, Ryan was like a wounded beast. He raged, rebelled, tried everything to prove himself right. He refused to believe Elizabeth could have left everything to me, the father he scorned. But I knew the road of teaching him would not be easy, and the first lesson would be this: to see for himself the true faces of the friends he trusted. One evening, when I informed him that all company credit cards would be cut off, and only the $300,000 left in his personal account would remain, Ryan sneered. "You think cutting cards will break me? You know nothing. My friends will never abandon me." I looked at him calmly. "Then prove it." Ryan swaggered, pulling out his phone, putting it on speaker for the room to hear. "Fine, I'll show you who's delusional." He dialed the first number. A cheerful male voice answered, "Ryan!" "We just met at the bar yesterday, and now you're calling already?" Ryan grinned triumphantly, glancing at me. "Yeah, I'm good. Hey, could you spot me $5,000 for a couple of days? I'll pay it back right away." The voice hesitated, suddenly changing tone. Sorry, I'm busy. Got something urgent. Maybe another time. Beep. Beep. Ryan's face tightened. He quickly dialed a second number. This time a woman's cheerful voice rang out. "Ryan! Is that you?" Ryan smirked, raising his voice. "Yeah, it's me. I need a quick favor. Could you lend me $5,000? Just for a day or two?" Silence hung for a few seconds. Then her tone dropped. "Oh, sorry. I'm strapped right now. I've got to go. Talk later." The call ended abruptly. Ryan's face flushed, but he tried to cover it. That was just a coincidence. "I've got plenty of friends," he dialed again. At first, the person on the other end was effusive, laughing. Ryan, the generous man himself. What's the plan tonight? Ryan cut in, brimming with confidence. Actually, I could use some help. I need about $5,000. The laughter died instantly, replaced by a cold voice. Ryan, sorry man, I don't have the money. Can't help you. Click! The room was thick with silence. Ryan gripped his phone, his lips pressed tight, his face paling as his arrogance shattered like glass on stone. I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. Do you see now, Ryan? When you opened your wallet to pay for parties and indulgences, they swarmed around you like bees to honey. But the moment you needed them, the moment you had no money, they turned away instantly. Those aren't friends. They're shadows clinging to your wealth. Ryan stayed silent, his eyes red, but still burning with defiance. I knew this was only the beginning. The first lesson had been planted. Yet, the path to turn him from arrogance into a man of worth would be long. After the humiliating phone calls, Ryan refused to admit defeat. He snarled, "They were just busy." "I'll never bow to you, do you hear me? I don't need anyone teaching me, especially you, a failure who never achieved anything in life." I looked straight into his eyes, not angry, just steady. "Think what you want, but from now on you will be responsible for your own life." The very next day, I locked all the company cards Ryan had squandered. The luxury cars were reclaimed and the extra accounts shut down. Only the $300,000 his mother had set aside remained, along with the house the will had granted, but under the condition that it could not be sold. Ryan went berserk. He hurled his phone against the floor, shouting, "You have no right." "That money is mine. My mother left it to me, not you." I remained calm. "Yes, 300,000 is yours, but you've burned most of it on parties and parasites. What remains is yours to manage. The company, the assets, the power, all of that lies with me, and I will not let you destroy it." Ryan's face reddened as he stepped close, jabbing a finger at me. "You want to make me a beggar? You want to humiliate me? I'll prove to you I don't need you." He stormed out again, seething with hatred. Yet that night, I noticed him sitting down, opening a stack of documents. Slowly, begrudgingly, his eyes fell on the words, a fragile sign of change. But change did not come immediately. For weeks, Ryan dodged, made excuses, barely skimmed a page before tossing it aside. He still wasn't desperate, believing the money in his account would carry him through, until the bills began to arrive. Utilities, maintenance, car insurance, and even loan repayments he had signed without reading. The balance dropped dangerously. Ryan stopped throwing parties, stopped calling friends, and the fewer the parties, the fewer the friends. One afternoon he came knocking on my apartment door, disheveled and exhausted. Dark circles rimmed his eyes. His shirt was wrinkled, and his hands trembled as he laid a stack of overdue notices in front of me. His voice was hoarse. I'm broke. Not even enough for food. Please, lend me a little, just a little." My chest ached at the sight, but my tone remained steady, firm. "I won't let you starve. But from now on, I'll only give you a small allowance each month, just enough for the basics. Food, transport, utilities. If you don't complete the coursework, if you don't change, even that will be cut. If you want to live, then you'll live by your own effort." Ryan clenched his fists, his eyes wet but still struggling to resist. You're turning me into a beggar." I placed my hand on the stack of documents and pushed them back toward him. "No. I'm giving you a chance. One chance. And so you won't be alone. I'll introduce you to someone. Someone your mother trusted more than anyone. Her right hand in the company. She will stand with me to guide you, to help you learn how to work, how to manage, and how to be a man." Ryan's eyes flickered with suspicion, tinged with curiosity. He said nothing, just silently took the papers back, while I sat still, praying that this time my son would truly begin. The next morning, I brought Ryan to the company headquarters, the building Elizabeth had built. He walked in reluctantly, hands stuffed in his pockets, his eyes still full of defiance. I knew if I relied only on my discipline, he would fight to the end. That's why I needed someone else, someone Elizabeth herself had chosen, to help me fulfill my final promise to her. On the 10th floor in the conference room, a young woman was waiting. She wore a neat black suit, her hair tied back, her eyes sharp and bright. I introduced her. Ryan, this is Sophia Carter. Your mother once considered her her right hand, the one who stood by her through the hardest years. And in her final letter, she asked me to work with Sophia, to guide you. From today, she will be your direct mentor in the company. Ryan frowned, tilting his chin in disdain. Her? What could an employee possibly teach me? Sophia didn't get angry. She simply smiled faintly and laid a thick file on the table. You may think so, but open this. Inside is the entire internal system, finances and contracts your mother left behind. I was the one directly responsible for them. If you think you're better, then go ahead. Manage this $20 million contract. I'll stand by and watch how you handle it. The room was tense. Ryan's face reddened, but he said nothing. He flipped through a few pages, his eyes darting, then slammed it shut. Nonsense. These papers are just meant to humiliate me. I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. No, Ryan. This is the real world. Your mother fought these numbers, these contracts, these life-or-death decisions all her life. Do you think parties and designer clothes are enough to keep this company? Number. Only learning, only discipline will preserve what your mother left. Sophia now looked directly at Ryan, her voice steady, each word sharp. You have two choices. Either become a true heir by learning step by step, or remain an outsider, watching this company slip into other hands. The choice is yours. Ryan clenched his fists so tight his nails dug into his skin. I saw in his eyes anger mixed with helplessness. For the first time, he had no reply. I nodded slightly at Sophia. I knew the road ahead would be long, full of conflict and tears, but at least the door to change had opened. In the early days, Ryan still sulked, reluctantly following orders from me and Sophia, but time waits for no one. When he had to join smaller meetings, draft contracts, or stand before employees to explain a plan, Ryan stumbled. Some days he was so flustered that he was questioned by partners, his face flushing as he wanted to run away. Instead of mocking him, Sophia stayed with him late into the night, going over each report, each number. I stood quietly outside, looking through the glass, seeing a Ryan no longer arrogant, but hunched over his notes, scribbling, crossing out, rewriting. At first he snapped, but gradually I saw his eyes change. Less arrogance, more patience. One morning, Ryan came into my office and laid a draft financial plan for a small project on my desk. His voice was no longer brash, but steady. Dad, this is what I've done. Sophia reviewed it. It may not be great, but I wrote it all from start to finish. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The numbers weren't perfect, but the effort was clear. I looked up at my son, his face still stiff, but his eyes no longer blazed with defiance. Instead, there was a quiet waiting, a yearning for recognition. I smiled, placing my hand on his shoulder. Ryan, I never needed you to be perfect. I only needed you to try, to change. This is the first time I've truly seen you begin. He lowered his head slightly. For the first time in years, I heard his voice soften, no longer a shout. Thank you, Dad. I'll try harder. My heart clenched. I remembered Elizabeth, remembered the letter she left. And in my soul, I whispered, Elizabeth, do you see? Our son has taken his first step that night. I wrote in the old notebook I'd kept for years. The road ahead is still long and hard. But today I saw a spark. If Ryan can keep it alive, tomorrow will be different. I closed the notebook and looked up at the night sky. The stars shone bright, like Elizabeth's eyes watching from afar. I smiled, a smile of relief after years of torment. My son, I believe that one day you will become the man both your mother and I always hoped for. The journey wasn't over, but for me, it was a beginning. Looking back at everything, I, David Miller, understood that life had given me a second chance, not just to safeguard an inheritance, but to save my son. The road ahead was still long and full of trials, but this time I would not fail. Because more than wealth, the legacy I wanted to leave behind was a son who knew how to live with honor. If you followed the story this far, I am truly grateful. Please subscribe to the channel, hit like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Ryan can truly change, or will he keep resisting until the end? I look forward to your answers. And don't forget to ring the notification bell, because in the next story you'll witness shocks even greater than this one.